Hi, Katie. It's so nice to have you back on the podcast. For those of you who have not listened to my guest, Katie Rose, she was on the podcast back in August on episode number 68. And we had a beautiful conversation about your yogic and vegan journey and your Jivamukti um, ties and what you've learned and how you share. And you also have an Ayurvedic background as well. So it's a tremendous pleasure to be able to talk to you again. And I'm really happy that we're kicking off the new year, especially with you, especially since you're in Australia. You can be our beacon of light and hope and your your new, I guess, products. I don't even know I would call them, but you have a journal that you just released and cards as well, the mindful living cards and the mindful journal. And when I was looking at them, I thought these are so perfect, especially for this time in turmoil where you're guiding. It's almost like a workshop or a long workshop. And it just allows the reader to have a spiritual experience where you not only allow them to be accountable for their actions, but I think you set them on the trajectory for being in a place of service. And I think as we move forward, as we come out of all this chaos, it's your work is really important. So thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for coming on and talking to me again.
Thanks, Holly. It's so nice to be here. Thank you.
We were talking off the air. So you are in South Wales, Australia? Is that
New South Wales, yeah,
New
Sydney.
South Wales? Okay. And so we were talking about last year around this time. You guys had a massive fire. Is it out now?
Oh, yes, yeah, it's been
Okay.
out for a long time. So we have bushfires pretty much every year in Australia. It's a fairly common phenomena for us. But last year they were really out of control and they were very localized to the area that I live in and huge, much bigger bushfires than I think we've ever seen, maybe even on record, I'm going to say. Like certainly huge amounts of land were lost and burnt back. And yeah, it's been huge.
So what's interesting to see is how now you're living, well, you were living in Australia before, but you guys are COVID free. You're living this life we once knew and loved early in 2020. And it seems from the US perspective, so we're just coming out, straight of the coup, pretty much the capital being, almost over not overthrown, but attacking on our capital, which was just crazy, the insurgents. And we're in this political fire and this political mess that we can't seem to kind of shake at the moment. Hopefully there's hope, but I love to just kind of see how being on opposite ends of the world, we're experiencing kind of the polar opposites, going from a calm to through the pandemic to now this craziness, and the opposite for you. it's
Mm.
it's really interesting to think about how karmically we're all in this world and experiencing it a little bit differently right now.
Yeah, and what I think is very interesting, I'll just say one thing to be completely clear. We're not totally COVID free in Australia,
Okay.
but we do have very, very low numbers, and it's extremely managed. So compared to you guys, and certainly compared to Europe and UK, we're COVID free, but it's still here, and we still have to be mindful. It's just not really impactful on our everyday lives at the moment. State borders are closed and there's travel restrictions, but it's very, very mild compared to what you're experiencing. But I was also going to just say, in response to what you were speaking about, that what's interesting, you spoke about the idea of the karmic kind of flow. What I'm finding very interesting about this time is that we don't have the opportunity to move ourselves to an environment where the conditions are more preferable. You know, in the last, let's say, 100 years or so, because of the way that industry has developed and travel and privilege, and because we mostly live in a capitalist society, if we don't like what's going on, we have the chance to leave. Like, I'm sure if the borders were open, many Americans and certainly many Europeans would be dashing to Australia right now.
Right.
And then, you know, last year during the bushfires, we would have been coming your way, and it's sort of, but that privilege has been reduced right now. And it's so interesting from a spiritual perspective, from a karmic perspective, to observe this idea that we have to stay where we are, and we have to find the tools to deal with what is happening. And there is no running away. There's no reshuffling of the deck. We are living through what we're living through. And this idea of lockdown, I've been thinking about these words, this idea of lockdown a lot. And it's kind of like positioned as you are, where you are, and this is what you're going to be facing for the foreseeable future. And I think spiritually, for me at least, that's a very interesting concept. And I see it really highlights for us how we deal with that idea of not being able to totally be in control of each moment of our lives.
Right. And I mean, kind of acceptance that we're not in control. I think a lot of times we have this false control where we think, you know, everything will be better in the future, or if we can just accomplish such, you know, this or do that, that we'll be in a place of peace.
Yeah.
But we are globally learning that the peace or the chaos resides from within, and learning how to manage that. One of the things that struck me in the journal was, you know, there was a portion, I can't remember which portion it was, but it was talking about like what's your input? Like what messages are you receiving? And how the mind, you know, follows, and the energy follows where the mind goes.
Yeah.
And it's an important lesson. And it allowed me to take a pause, because I have been hyper focused as of late just on watching what is unfolding.
Mm.
And while it's historical and interesting and good to know what's going on, it's also all consuming. And things that I have suffered with in the past of anxiety and, you know, just this pent up energy started coming back. And looking at that, when I was reviewing just the journal before that we spoke, I thought, well, there you go. And, you know, I was off on a run this morning with a friend, and I thought, you know what, don't listen to the news. And I put on something else instead that was just a calming, peaceful music. And it really just kind of set the tone and helped so much. What did you find? Like, what were the pitfalls that you experienced from an emotional level during the pandemic? I mean, now you guys are able to interact almost normally, correct? Like, no masks, you don't have to social distance. Yeah. So what did you find being locked down? Like, what did you notice about where your own mind went, and how did you, if you had any lows, you know, you might have, I don't know, a lot of us did, but how did you find a way to get yourself on a different path?
Yeah, it's a rich question. We do have some restrictions now. We have some places where we need to wear masks, and there's social distancing considerations. But for us, the biggest restriction is we're in a bubble and we can't leave or enter or leave Australia at all, and we can't travel between states. Gosh, the lessons of lockdown. It's, you know, I don't know if you've seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma. Most people have seen it by now,
Sure.
I think. And it's this idea of the algorithm kind of dictating the bubble that we live in and what we see. And I think of the mind as being somewhat like that algorithm as well. It's like, we all get very up in arms about what social media is feeding us and doing to our brains. And of course, it's very impactful. It's deeply impactful, but so is our own thinking. And, we have this internal algorithm within the mind, which is very sophisticated, that allows certain information in, filters other information out, and like you said, snowballs particular what we would call in Sanskrit, in yogic wisdom, samskaras, but we can just think of them as little algorithms that keep repeating. And so what happens is we get onto a particular kind of state, let's say a particular samskara, a particular thought pattern, and it tends to amplify as we keep revisiting it, and it tends to morph and distort somewhat as well. And this can happen at any time. It doesn't matter if you're in lockdown or if it's the middle of the bushfires or if you're, in a joyful, blissful state. What's interesting to me is the choices that we have around being able to switch out and change those patterns, being able to jump off the train and say, no, I choose something different. And it's a beautiful example that you give. It could be as simple as what media you choose to put in, like, or your level of presence in any particular moment, like whether or not you're really engaging with the people that are, sitting around the table with you, or whether you're kind of distracted, or these types of choices that we all make multiple times every day. And so for me, I increasingly, we know this sort of yoga philosophy, but I think what we've seen really amplified in the crisis situation that the world is in right now is the autonomy that we do have, which is the autonomy around what we're allowing to continue to be sort of generated and then amplified in our own thinking. And we have the practices, we have access. I mean, if you have an internet connection, you have access to infinite practices. But even if you don't, and you know a little bit about mindfulness or meditation or yoga, you've already got enough tools for a lifetime of calming the chitta-vritti, calming the mental agitation. And so for me, I mean, I don't want to sound in any way arrogant, and I realize I live in a situation of deep privilege, but the lockdown was really not such a big deal. There were some challenges, definitely, and I've got 4 kids and they were bouncing off the walls and it was, pretty intense. But I've spent a lot of time preparing for my life to have ups and downs. I expect ups and downs because I know that that's what life is like. If we cling on to this idea that we need all the external conditions to be perfect in order to feel okay, it's going to be a lifetime of disappointment. Anything could happen at any moment, your partner could reveal to you something that you didn't know, your child could become sick, your financial situation could change, a global pandemic could break out, etc., etc. The political system that you believed to be completely stable could start to crumble. What to do? I live not in a anxious or overly vigilant way at all, but I really live in such a way that I expect the unexpected and try very hard not to cling to this idea of things won't change. And that's, for me, has been very, very helpful. And then, this idea of thinking about my own mind as like a computer almost, that I can choose how I program that computer.
I don't know, what strikes me about you, what I really, really enjoy is that you have the ability to switch up your algorithm, but you do it with your media as well. And you try to listen or get an understanding about how somebody else is perceiving something. And it's a skill set that I think at least the US needs at the moment. But I think everyone really could use that. And I know when we were speaking about it before, it was in regards to someone who's not yet vegan and becoming or being an activist and, being able to do it in a way where it's effective. And so now I think we're challenged as a society to be able to find the other algorithm, which is difficult. I wish there was a filter. Wouldn't that be amazing? Just on your social media, if you can, all right, I want the algorithm of X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
and it would be really interesting if you can manage your own mind's reaction to it. But I found that really, really interesting. And so how do you do that? I know you've done it before. Have you done it in regards to the pandemic, or just in your personal life as of late? How do you use that? How do you apply switching an algorithm?
Like for me, meditation is the key, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the same for everybody. I think each of us, we're so unique. If we continue with this sort of idea of the algorithm, it's like we're all running on different programs. So this, what is going to fix or help me might be quite different to what will help somebody else. It might be, exercise. It might be yoga asana. It might be a particular sadhana practice, like something that really lights you up. Like, it could be cooking or making art or music. Like for me, it's very much meditation. I think the key though is within whatever it is that you choose as that practice, that it's inviting self-reflection. It's inviting the capacity that we have to witness what in Sanskrit is the sakshi, the ability to look outside and go, okay, I'm on the anxiety channel right now. Exactly like you described this morning with your run. It's the perfect example. Like I can make a choice right now. I can go consume a whole load more media about what's going on in the world and feel my anxiety rise. Or I can choose a different pathway, which doesn't mean I don't care. It's not like, oh, put me in my little bubble and I don't want to know what's going on. It's really not that. And I can, change my mental states in a different way, and which will be more helpful and which will enable me to show up in service. Because if I'm in complete overwhelm and I'm not coping and I'm shutting down and I'm so anxious I can't function, there's no service in that. In fact, the only place that we can really find true service is when our nervous systems are stable and when we're feeling steady. So yeah, for me, it's a daily meditation practice, and that's the opportunity that I have each day to recalibrate, to check in, to really notice where I'm at. And it's interesting. Like sometimes I'll sit in my practice and I'll notice, okay, my energy's low. Like last night, just before I went to bed, I was like, God, I don't feel good. Like I'm noticing myself feeling really flat right now. Like I just don't feel good. And then I woke up this morning and I felt great. And I realized I was just tired. I was really tired. And I'm good at battling through low sleep because I've had so many children. And one of my children was a terrible sleeper. So I'm very resilient when it comes to low sleep. But then occasionally I'll notice my mood is low. And I'm like, what is that? And I know for me, very often it's just tiredness. I need a really good 9-10 hour sleep stretch and I'll be fine. So it's also, some of it is knowing what our own particular triggers are and then managing that, whether you've got a sensitivity to food or you have or particular types of food or a sensitivity to sleep, or where are you resilient, where are you less resilient, like that. But one other thing I'll also say, just to come back to the conversation about plant-based diet, is with this idea of the algorithm in the mind, I also notice with myself how important the messaging I receive around that is too. Like I could, for example, if I hang out with my children and one of my kids is 14, so he's sort of emerging, I call him the man child, like he's emerging into adulthood and he's extremely mature and big and sort of, he's a man child. And if I hang out with him and his mates, it's a very much a meat-eating culture and a fast food culture. Actually, I'm astounded by the amount of junk food these kids eat. It kind of blows my mind. And my child is very different to that because he's been raised differently. But I can really see, when I look at them all around the table and I see them eating, I can see how deeply influential the normalizing of the junk food culture and the meat-eating culture is for him as a teenage child. And I can see, the other night, not in my home, but in someone else's home, they were all eating like junk food, fast food, and they all had their own bags and, they ate their food and then at the end they just scrunched up all their bags, no plates or cutlery or anything, and threw them all in the bin. And just watching that process of like 5 teenage boys do that, which is such a normal, everyday thing to observe. The normalization of that to me was astounding. And then when my son privately later, because I don't want to embarrass him in front of his friends, I said, hey, it really, like, it hurts my heart to see the packaging that just goes into the bin, the lack of thoughtful awareness around eating a meal, the mindless, consuming of animal products. Like, it hurts me. Like, I feel it and I watch it and it hurts. And so that's a sensitivity that I have cultivated. I've cultivated that, and I want to cultivate that in him and in anyone I can influence. Just let's get a little bit more mindful. And that's the algorithm too. It's like choosing. I want to be aware of this. I don't want to live in a mindless void where I'm just consume. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's not too abstract as an example.
No, I mean, I don't think it is. And I think it's an interesting segue just into this idea of, you know, the food that we consume, whether it's even plant based junk food or regular junk food, standard, I have to say standard American, and yet I'm standard Australian diet.
Yeah.
Still sad, right? Um, but when we look at the energetic quality of the food and then how it interplays with our own thoughtfulness, I think it's interesting to look at why we are, in the mess that we are in society right now, and how just taking something which is a normal occurrence, kids having junk food happens all the time, has been happening for decades.
Mm.
uh how that's truly affecting how we decide to interact not only with each other, but the consequences that it's having on the planet. And whether it's more fires, whether it's animal products and leading to a pandemic, but there are implications for our actions. And when we do consistently do this without bringing awareness to it, I think it shows the importance of shifting the diet, especially as someone who is spiritually minded, into food that might allow for more receptivity.
Yeah. Yeah. And even before we get to thinking about what the food is, like just putting that to the side for a moment, can we come at the practice of eating with a little more mindfulness? Can there be some grace and some present moment connection in that process? Because I feel that could be a very powerful stepping stone to then thinking more carefully about what we're eating. It's
I
if
would
your food
say,
just comes in a brown paper bag and you just gobble
right.
it down and you're not even engaged, how are you going to reflect on the energetic imprint of that food? The reflection is that piece is missing.
That's true. But I almost wonder if during lockdown, that hasn't opened for many families. Not all, but at least in our own home, the family dinner was gone. And my
Mm.
older daughter dances 20 some odd hours a week. So she was gone up until the point she was driving. She was having rehearsals. And so it was just my youngest daughter and I making dinner, and then everybody else kind of catching up. And just being 17, when you're 17, the last thing you want to do is hang out with your parents like all the time. Not that she doesn't love us, but we did have that opportunity for dinner once again become, being something special. Did you experience that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, we still do family dinner. I'm really
Mm.
strict about it, and I guess this is what I'm speaking to in some ways. Like for me, and it would be so easy not to. Like we've got, kids are all in different places, like you, doing different activities, and between two households because I'm co-parenting with their father. But it's actually something their father and I both feel really strongly about. He's Greek culture, so it's very much you sit around the dinner table and everybody is eating together. And I think it's really precious. I think it's a very, very precious opportunity for my kids are all foodies. They all love food and they notice food and they notice how it's served and if it's good, and will often choose healthier options over less healthy options. And I attribute a lot of that truly not just to the food they've been given, but to the way in which it's been given. It's been given with a reverence. And you know, even their father, my ex-husband, who does eat meat and does serve them meat in his home, it's never, and I'm not advocating for meat eating, please don't hear that in this, but it's done with a sense of respect, non-waste, thoughtful, intention. And I think that's a very good stepping stone to the choices that we then make as adults. You know, it's really, I'm seeing it more and more as a very important element in our food choices, the way in which we eat, not just what we eat.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And you know what I like about the way that you're able to have a co-family and have almost a loving acceptance for where your you know, ex-partner, I guess partner but ex-partner is now.
Yeah.
And you know, it's admirable. And what I liked as well is, you know, in the journaling process, you lightly touch upon why a spiritual practice would be vegan. Like you give the reasons why. You make mention of ahimsa and its importance. And then you just ask to reflect what you're doing now. And I think that's a nice way to just broach the subject with people who may otherwise, you know, you try not to offend, and but at the same time be able to teach, because when somebody, you know, is closed off, they're not going to hear the message. But to be able to suggest it in such a way and remain true to, you know, your spiritual path and where you see the importance of veganism in it, I think is a lovely way as a teacher to then introduce it to others. I think it was really special that it was in there, and the way that you do it is very just gentle but clear.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think it's a dance that I'm playing with a lot, you know, like how much to advocate, how much to step back, how much to share my ideas and my thoughts, how much to not. And these are boundaries that we're always playing with in life as parents, as, you know, colleagues, as partners. It's and I think with the food choices, it becomes particularly important because people have such strong ideas about what they eat and how they eat.
Yeah.
And recently I've been feeling like and again, this is sort of part of that sort of dialogue with self. Recently I've been reflecting that maybe I'm a little bit on the too soft, to the point of being now permissive side, you know, like I think we can go, like, for example, this is a sort of different example, but I have a friend who's been struggling a lot with drinking too much alcohol. And she's in a recovery program and she's, you know, getting support and what have you. And many of our friends in the circle have sort of been quite enabling. You know, they've been saying, well, it's okay. And, you know, you'll figure it out in your own time. And we're here for you and we support you. And I had a conversation with her not so long ago where I said, you know, I just want you to know that this is impacting me. And I see it's impacting your children. And there is an impact here. And I want to be a truth speaker. I want to tell you that because I see a lot of people around you not telling you that because they don't want to have a difficult conversation.
Right.
And so I sort of feel the same with the, activism, not even just veganism, but activism as a whole. It's like, actually, I want to be the person who says, guys, we don't need 10 plastic straws.
Right.
We don't need 3 napkins each. Can we just, and I feel like because our society is so, there's 2 things that happen. One is that you're not meant to interfere in someone else's life at all. We live in this very autonomous, but to the point where a community gets eroded. And second of all, we just slowly go with what everyone else is doing. We get very much sort of lullabied into this toxic culture. And I feel like, no, I want to not fall under the spell, and also be a truth speaker, even when speaking the truth is confronting, hard to hear.
Yeah. And, I respect that. It's so interesting that we're talking about this right now, because I was talking about it with this new woman that I met. Where like we socially distance run. I hate running with a mask on. I'm just going to tell you it's awful. It's really
Yeah.
difficult, but it's so wonderful that perfect stranger just said, "Hey, I just moved here. Anybody want to do this?" And we were talking about it because it was a really rough day for her. She had just had an argument and she was upset. It was wonderful. It was almost divine timing. And I was all stressed out before I saw her as well. But we were speaking about friendships and when people are willing to speak the truth and how rare it is to have a friend. I remember when I was a kid, somebody would just call you on your shit. It wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And we've set up this almost unspoken dialogue where we want to be fully accepting of everything. And yet when there isn't a societal, oh gosh, like value system, I
Yeah.
guess that's the word, because our societal value system has been just removed.
Yeah.
Like, as seen with what's going on in America, like just tweets that happen or have happened, and this lack of respect for other people, and just this free for all. And I think people who can have the courage to speak to others and be kind about it, I guess you run that risk of being vulnerable, and maybe somebody will shut you down. But at least for me, I have tremendous respect when somebody will call me on something. And to this day, I only have one friend that really does it. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, well, maybe it's just an American thing that we don't do this anymore, because she's from Cyprus.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It is cultural. I don't know if it's just American. I think it's sort of our Western industrialized culture.
yeah,
It's certainly happening here in Australia. And I, like you, I am noticing it more and more, to the point where recently I have said to my very close circle of friends, I'm single at the moment. I don't have a partner. So I feel like what's happened with, and it's happened with many things, is that the partner becomes the person that does all of that job. When I was married, the sounding board would be your partner, and you
right.
get all the feedback from this one person, which is never helpful, for one person to have the burden of that responsibility. So
Right.
I've said to a couple of my very close friends recently, please, I want you to know that actually you're the main accountability marker in my life right now. Like, our friendship is really important to me, and I don't have other adults in my life, like a partner, or my parents are overseas, for example. If you see me, getting into a pattern with my parenting, or a particular way of behaving, I'm asking you to give me feedback, and that would deepen our friendship. And funnily enough, actually, my son, my 14-year-old, again, the other day said to me, Mum, I really want to talk to you about something. He said, I've noticed that you have a habit of often interrupting people. And I've noticed it, and I'm telling you, because sometimes it's awkward. And I do have that
He's
habit. It's a
14, right?
14.
Yeah, well,
It's
there
a
you go. That's
terrible
what I was
habit that I have. Like, I really,
right.
I speak over people, especially when I'm passionate, when I'm excited.
Right.
And it was a little bit hard to hear. Like, I felt immediately a bit defensive and kind of wanted to justify. And then I was like, you know what? This is precious feedback. This is exactly what I'm asking for. And he's right.
Right.
You know, it's powerful, because otherwise we can create lives for ourselves where we never hear the feedback, we never make the changes, we don't grow. We don't live in a lineage system where we have a spiritual teacher. See, this is another thing, right? Is that if we look at lineage and we look at ancestry, culturally, you'd have elders, there'd be a family hierarchy. Spiritually, you'd have priest, guru, spiritual advisor, and then you'd have accountability within your community. Every element of our accountability has become eroded. No wonder people find it hard to care about veganism or a plant-based diet, because who's holding any of us accountable for anything?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to, I feel like it's a call to yogis and yoga teachers. It's so hard, and it is hard. I think it's hard to step up sometimes if you are, um, because you don't want to offend, you don't want to lose people,
Mm.
but when you speak in a way where you're not telling your truth and then asking for, more from your students, more from, in a spiritual way, not necessarily in a physical way, but this idea that we should, as a society, as yoga teachers as well, be the beacon of light and start to help others go towards it.
Yeah.
And I think we've all, as a society, kind of forgotten that way. And I think there's been a lot of, just focus on the love and the light, and it gets a little empty.
Yeah.
Without,
it's even more dangerous than empty. It's permissive of bad behavior sometimes. It's like,
right.
oh, you just do as you feel. This idea of spiritual bypassing. I was following my intuition. No, actually, you were just behaving like an asshole. Like, like,
Yes. And this idea, something that I was thinking about is this idea of self-care, right? The
oh,
idea.
please don't get me started.
No, I'm going to get you started, because I think what I like about you, you're direct. I like direct. I deal well with direct people. But self-care is important, but the self-care is for something else. And I believe it's to be in selfless service, right? You
Mhm.
have to be able to, yes, take care of yourself. Lovely story as a mom where I had a shard of glass at my foot for about a week. There's moments where you need to pull over and say, so, okay, somebody else look after my baby. I have to take care of the glass in my foot. But, we'll get so absorbed sometimes in taking care of others, especially as women, especially as moms, that yes, the self-care does become important, because otherwise it's neglectful to yourself. But it doesn't mean that we're self-obsessed. It doesn't mean that we don't take those moments and then use that energy to be in loving service for some greater good. And I think that element is desperately missing
I couldn't
in.
agree more. And having young children is a good example. I've thought about this a lot recently, and I have a little bit of a reframe on the self-care idea, and it's this: my activism is my self-care, because my work as an activist, it could be so easily put to the side. Life is busy. The culture that we live in doesn't really support it. It often requires me to call on my inner reserves and be resilient and be brave. And yet, if I don't honor that part of me that's called to the activist path, I erode my sense of self to the point where I don't recognize myself anymore. I will lose myself. I'll lose my sense of value. I'll lose my sense of purpose. And so for me, staying in alignment with my activism path, and for me, that's been very much about animal rights. That's the calling I have had, is to stay in alignment with who I am and what I was put on this planet to do. And if I lose that, there is no self. It's like I've lost
Your dharma.
my center. So yeah, and oftentimes what that may look like is staying up late doing a piece of work instead of prioritizing sleep, or speaking up when I'd rather not have a confrontation, or in other words, it means doing hard things. But I see those hard things as the self-care, as the maintenance of my alignment with my values. And there's actually nothing more important for me. There's nothing more important than that.
Right. And that's a much different take on self-care than what is often talked about. As far as your activism, and I can see your activism in the work that you're doing, has have you been doing other types of activism during just this whole COVID lockdown world that we've been living in? What does it look like?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I guess for me, with the COVID thing, a lot of it has been around showing up in the online space and offering support in that way, which I do anyway, because I run online programs predominantly. That's my main kind of gig these days. Back a year or so ago, when the bushfires were happening, there was a lot more for me in terms of the animals work. We lost a huge amount of our wildlife during that time. Really big numbers of particularly kangaroos and koalas, which are such iconic Australian sort of symbols. And so, yeah, doing a bit of work, both fundraising and also actually organising packages and materials to be sent to the little koala hospitals, because so many koalas and kangaroos were coming in with burns injuries. And people were working around the clock to try to nurse them and to save them. So yeah, I work on different projects at different times, but that's certainly been a big one in the last couple of years. And I try to make sure, I make sure that there's always one or two projects I'm working on at any given moment that are in that service area, because otherwise, like I said before, life just takes over. Kids needing to make money, all the sort of practical things. It's so easy to just kind of say, oh, later, later, later. And before you know it, later never happens. So yeah, they're real priorities for me.
Yeah. And I think the idea of aligning with your true calling, right, or yourself, it is hard sometimes to kind of step in the seat of yourself and to find that expression of activism, almost under the same umbrella of being able to speak truthfully. Because we do have to approach, we don't have to approach activism. Everyone does it differently. But I think as vegans, we're constantly trying to find the way to deliver a message so that someone can hear it.
Yeah.
And hopefully do something with it.
Yeah. And it goes full circle. It goes back to this idea of accountability that we were just speaking about, that if we're not holding ourselves accountable and others around us don't hold us accountable, then it all very quickly becomes a kind of murky soup where we've lost our compass. It can be such small things, it might even be Meatless Monday, like a start. It doesn't have to be, I'm not talking, because I think even people hear the word activism and they kind of imagine this sort of like a friend of mine said to me the other day, oh, I'm not an activist. She actually said, I don't have a placard and go out and do, protests and stuff. I was like, no, you're one of the most activism filled people I know. She runs a organization supporting women to start their own entrepreneurial wellness businesses. I was like, that's activism. You're doing good work in the world, and you're a truth speaker and you're a change maker. And so our activism can be under the radar, it can be in disguise, and it can be very small things. But for me at the moment, I'm seeing that accountability piece is incredibly important.
Yeah. But what are a couple steps somebody can take to start shifting in the direction of selfless service and holding themselves accountable?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the journaling is a tool for the self-reflection that would enable us to know what steps to take. That's where the journaling fits in, because it's like I was speaking about meditation, and journaling is a huge part of my own practice too. It's where we allow the ideas and the thoughts to come out in such a way that we can then have an analysis outside of ourselves. We can kind of go, oh, okay, I'm really XYZ. But in terms of the advice, I'm gonna suggest two things. One is, and they're going to sound like they conflict, but just bear with me. So the first piece of advice I would give would be, choose something that you can do each day that is easeful. Like one thing that you really enjoy. Like, so for me, I actually enjoy meditation. Like, it's a practice that supports me, that lights me up. I want to do it. So whether it's, you know, journaling or meditating or asana practice or going for a run, but one practice that you do every day that you enjoy. It's not hard. It's not like a sort of self-punishment experience. And then have the discipline and commit to it. So that's the first thing. Like, just really, it's a non-negotiable. You know, you just do it every day, whether you feel like it or not, because there's great power in that. And then the second one would be almost the flip opposite, which is do something, make a commitment to something that's a little bit hard or involves a little bit of self-sacrifice. So very small example, but it's a true example. I recently made the commitment. I noticed myself I like to get a coffee every morning when I take my kids to school. It's my habit to get a takeout coffee, and I really enjoy that coffee. And I noticed I kept forgetting my reusable cup, and I was getting more and more slack, so that increasingly I was getting a disposable cup every day, a takeout cup. Right. And so at the beginning of this year, I was like, right, I'm making a commitment to self. If I forget the reusable cup, I don't get the coffee, which is a big sacrifice. Like that, like a small thing that, like, yeah. I'm gonna realign back to my values, you know? So if it could be in your diet, it could be like, I'm gonna cut out this particular thing, or I'm going to add more of this particular thing, but there's a little bit of a discomfort there. Like, you're holding yourself accountable to something that will create a little bit of effort, and what we would call in yoga tapas, you know, a bit of fire. Like, the bigger goal is more important than the in the moment just desire for the coffee. So that would be my advice. Start with baby steps. Especially right now, everyone's nervous systems are so overtaxed. Let's not get too hard on ourselves. One thing that really lights you up, making a steady daily commitment to that, and one thing that stretches you a little bit, and making a steady daily commitment to that.
Yeah. And I, at least for myself, when I do commit to doing something that's on the harder side, for me, making a new habit or shifting just the way that that's my dog, sorry. Just shifting the way that I'm thinking, or beginning to do something, accomplish something that's been hard, is making it approachable, like just a small amount, so that it's not too much where it's overwhelming, but you can get into it enough where you know, you challenge yourself a little bit. And that seems to have helped with consistency for me.
Yeah, that's very much been my pattern too. And you know, like anything, it's a muscle that you work and you get better at it, and then you incrementally you can build on it.
Right. And I think one more thing that we should add is just this idea of living with, you know, compassion, right? Compassion for yourself, for where you are, but then extending that compassion and seeing how far you can throw that extension.
Yeah. And I think I may not have a fully formed sort of way of articulating this, but it's something I've been reflecting on a lot, and it ties in with this idea of the self-care that we were speaking about. And it's something around compassion in the way that we speak to ourselves, not necessarily compassion in terms of letting ourselves off the hook constantly in the way that we act in the world. So I feel like our self-care and our compassion, many of us could do well to redirect, not so much around external actions, but more around self-talk, because when the self-talk shifts, the actions will come into alignment with that. But if there's a lot of low self-talk, unkind, uncompassionate self-talk, that's a very toxic, that's a very toxic place to try to act from.
Right.
So it shouldn't be from a place of, ideally none of our actions will be from a place of disliking ourselves.
To just shift on to one thing that we didn't talk about were your cards. So the mindful living cards. So we spent a lot of time talking about journaling and becoming accountable. You also have a deck of cards that you've released. Can you talk about them just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The cards are fun, really. Like the journaling is a more of a kind of in-depth deep dive. And what I will say about the journal is it's not, there's some sort of lighter and fluffier elements, but some of the questions and some of the work in there is quite deep work. Like it's an invitation to really self-reflect.
Right.
The cards are a little bit more like a fun kind of lighter approach. The way I use them is I have a little sacred space in my bedroom, and when I wake up in the morning I light a candle and I just kind of take a moment of connection. And the cards are a beautiful way to set an intention for the day, or if you're having a little moment of being a bit stressed out, you could select one, and they've all got a higher vibration to them. So they invite positive qualities, positive modes of thinking, reflections and insights that, might helpfully guide you to reconnect more deeply to your body or to your breath, or to your sense of connection to spirit. And so, they're a tool that really support my other work, and just a very accessible, quick and easy way to reconnect when you're feeling a little bit kind of overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think they could be used as well to, oh gosh, I'm going to let her in. Hold on.
Yeah,
I just, the kid, it's like, if it's not the kids, it's the dogs. Give me 1 second here.
sure.
Sorry about that. All right. Yep, and
Okay.
there's Mango. There you go. Yeah, what I was going to say before the interruption of my dogs was that you could almost use the cards as a dialogue with friends, right? To go a
Yeah,
little deeper,
yeah.
and
And I
just
use them in class actually too as a teacher. Like I'll often offer the option that people can select a card, or if I'm doing a speaking circle in a training or something like that, I'll have the cards as a kind of way in for people to speak about where they're at or how they're doing. Yeah.
yeah, that's a lot of fun. Well, I'm so happy to know that you guys are enjoying your summer over there, and your world isn't on fire anymore, and there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel. So
Yeah.
it's it's hopeful. It's hopeful to speak to
Yeah.
you and to be able to see that and hear that, because I've experienced the opposite as well, in talking to people from Australia last year, same time. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful, and a reminder that, life is kind of ever changing and shifting, and to hopefully not get too attached to either end of the spectrum.
Yeah. And by the same token, I think I am, and I know many people here are watching very closely what's happening in the States right now, and sending our prayers. And, it's not, it's been a very rough ride for you guys, and it hasn't finished yet, but you're very much in our thoughts and in our prayers right now.
Thank you. I'll take that, because we need it. Hopefully we will be able to pass through this. But we'll see. We will see. Uh, so before we end the conversation, you are doing a giveaway, and I'm going to be putting it in the show notes, but I wanted to also make note of it. So if you're listening to it, I'm sure there's an end date to the giveaway, but would you just talk about what
Oh, so I'm going to
it
send
is?
a set of Ayurvedic tea. I have a tea company as well as producing the books, and a copy of the new journal, which has just come out, to somebody who there'll be a little link and everyone can enter, and then we'll just at random pick someone to win that prize, and I'll mail that out to the winner. So yeah, we should set an end date. I will do that. I didn't think about that, but we'll create a time deadline, and yeah, go ahead and enter, and you may win.
Awesome. All right. Well, it was a tremendous pleasure to talk to you again. I hope I will speak to you again in the future, but truly appreciate all the wisdom that you have to share.
Thanks, Holly. I always love chatting with you. Thank you for having me.